Welcome. In this explainer, we're diving into the really fascinating story of Rwanda. Now, you've probably heard about the country's incredible progress in women's empowerment. It's famous for it. But as we're about to see, the headline numbers, well, they don't always tell the whole story.
And look, this isn't just hype. A major 2023 report from the International Food Policy Research Institute kicks things off by stating this as a plain fact. Rwanda has absolutely built a global reputation for gender equality, and in so many ways, it is absolutely well-deserved.
The data really backs this up. If you look at something called the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, or WEAI, Rwanda's score is a super impressive 0.91. That means about 72% of its women in agriculture are considered empowered. I mean, just look at how that stacks up against its neighbors. On the surface, it's a huge, clear-cut success story.
Which brings us to a really critical question. If everything looks so great, why would Rwanda's own Ministry of Agriculture decide to commission a massive, detailed, nationwide study on this exact topic? What were they hoping to find?
Well, the answer really lies in the tool they decided to use, the WEAI. See, this isn't just some simple poll. It's a highly specialized index that's designed to measure empowerment in a really nuanced way. It looks at everything from who's making the decisions on the farm to who actually controls the money that comes in. And here's the crucial part you need to know. The WEAI has two main components. First, there's the 5DE, which is all about a woman's individual empowerment. But then there's the second part, the GPI, or Gender Parity Index, and it does something totally different. It compares her empowerment score directly to the man living in the very same household. And this is where things start to get really interesting.
Because when the researchers crunched all the data from nearly 6,000 households across the country, they found a fundamental, and I mean fundamental, paradox at the very heart of Rwanda's success story. Okay, so here's the paradox in a nutshell. When you compare Rwandan women to women in other countries, they look incredibly empowered. They really do. But when you use that gender parity index to compare them to the men in their own country, sometimes in their own homes, all of a sudden, these really significant gaps start to appear. It's a total tale of two different comparisons. So let's unpack these gaps one by one. And we're going to start with one of the most important drivers for economic growth anywhere, access to finance. Now, at first glance, overall access to credit looks pretty close, but you can still see a noticeable 5-point gap. And while that might not seem like a huge deal, the study found that this gap actually gets wider when you look specifically at formal credit, from actual banks. That's where men have a much more distinct advantage in getting their hands on real financial power. So the study asked women, what's holding you back? And the number one reason they gave for being denied credit was a lack of collateral.
And the scale of this is pretty stark. A full 40% of women pointed to this one single issue. And of course, collateral is often tied to owning assets, which is another area where men tend to have an advantage.
All right, this leads us right into the next gap, which is all about who gets to participate in, and, maybe more importantly, who profits from the agricultural value chains. Let's use coffee as an example. It's a huge cash crop there. What's so fascinating is that women's participation in the production of coffee is almost identical to men's. But then, look at this. A massive 11-point gap opens up when it comes to who makes the final call to sell. 97% of men who are involved get to make that decision, but only 86% of women do. And you see this same pattern across other value chains too. Women are absolutely essential to production, but they have way less say in the marketing and sales decisions. The parts that actually turn all that hard work into cash. Okay, so this brings us to gap number 3. Access to information and training that can boost productivity. These are known as extension services. And yep, you guessed it, we see another clear gap. 71% of men said they accessed these vital services in the last year, compared to only 62% of women. That's a 9-point gap in access to knowledge that could literally change their fortunes.
Now, the report does note an interesting detail here. It seems like non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, are actually targeting women more actively, which suggests they're kind of filling a void that some of the public programs might be leaving.
And that brings us to our final gap. And honestly, it might be the most profound one of all, because it affects everything else. It's the sheer weight of the workload, what people often call the double burden.
Wow, this slide tells such a powerful story about time. Men spend quite a bit more time on productive work, that stuff that generates income. But then, just look at the reproductive work. We're talking about domestic chores, cooking, fetching water, childcare. Women spend a staggering 3.86 hours a day on these tasks, compared to less than 1 hour for men.
Just let that sink in for a second. Over 4 times as many hours every single day on essential but unpaid household labor. That is time that simply cannot be spent earning an income, getting trainings, or going to the market.
So it's not really a surprise that this huge time burden translates directly into a power gap, right? The data shows that because of this, men are much more likely to control the decisions over major assets like land and livestock, and they have more say over the money that comes from them.
But the report doesn't just leave us with the problems. It actually prescribes a cure. It lays out a really clear path for how to close these gaps and achieve true gender parity.
So here are the 4 key recommendations. First, create new financial products that don't rely so heavily on old-school collateral. Second, actively help women get into the more profitable parts of the market. Third, make sure those extension services are designed from the ground up to reach both men and women in a household. And finally, number 4, tackle that massive workload imbalance, not just with technology, but by challenging the social norms that keep it in place.
So what we have here is a country that's rightly seen as a leader, but is also honest enough to look deeper and see the challenges that remain. The paradox is clear. The internal gaps have been measured, and a strategic path forward has been laid out. The big question now is, can Rwanda build on all its incredible success and close these final, crucial gaps to write the next, even more impressive chapter in its empowerment story?